we really see is the activity of infinite consciousness. It appears as a material world because we view it from the localized perspective as our finite mind. In religious language, the world is how God's thoughts appear to a finite mind.
Okay, Bernardo and Rupert, welcome. So to get started, both of you have arrived at a very similar understanding of the nature of reality. And my question here to both of you is, why is this significant that you have arrived there from completely different backgrounds and points of view, but you've arrived at a similar place now? What is this understanding and how did you get there? So Bernardo, if you want to start, and then we can move to Rupert.
Well, there is something rather indelible about what is true, right? I mean, we can fool ourselves for a very long time, longer than we should, but eventually we end up stumbling upon what is true. We hit our nose on it at some point. And so there is this indelibility about truthness, that truth that you can't avoid. And I think I stumbled upon it because upon realizing that the narrative in terms of which I related to the world was not only implausible, but flat out untenable, you feel like you're in free fall because you don't have anymore a model in terms of which to be in the world. And you start looking desperately for one that sort of holds up to scrutiny, to evidence and reason. And so I stumbled upon it out of that, desperate need to make sense of things, and realizing then that people like Rupert sort of inhabit that space, and that the sages throughout history have inhabited that space. It only gives reassurance that okay, I'm not on a wrong track here. This is known territory. I'm not the first human being to step on it. If I were, I would be very nervous and would have a lot of self-doubt. Now, how I got there, I got there through what I hope was disciplined, self-consistent thinking, reasoning, looking at the evidence. There's a lot of evidence that contradicts mainstream physicalism or materialism or our mainstream narrative today. So that was my path. It's not the royal path. It's the path of, I don't know, the drunken man who ends up by chance stumbling on the right door. But that Rupert is there provided me with a lot of reassurance.
Interesting. Okay, Rupert, what about yourself?
Well, I was educated, like all of us, to believe that our senses give us a clear windscreen through which we look at reality, and they give us an accurate representation of reality, and that the ideas that come from the representation of reality that the senses give to us are as accurate as the evidence of the senses. So this is the materialist paradigm that we were all brought up with. But this, just from an early age, I didn't reason this out. I just felt that there was something intrinsically wrong with this worldview, and not least because suffering is the inevitable consequence of it. And so I began to question this paradigm from an early age. And in my late teens, I realized that there are two different things. They're not really different things, but there are two different aspects. There's reality, and there is the way reality appears to a human mind through its faculties of perception and conception, thinking and perceiving. And so I got this intuition that I had early on in my life that there was a reality behind the world. It's not really behind the world, it expresses itself as the world. But in my early years, I felt that it was somehow behind the world, as one might believe that the screen is behind a movie. And when I began to get a taste of this, which I first did through the traditional Advaita Vedanta teachings from India, it made so much sense to me. I just got this intuitive understanding, yes, that I know that's true. I didn't understand it. I'm now in my late teens, early 20s. All the literature I was reading from that tradition just confirmed my intuition that the world was an illusion, which doesn't mean to say that the world is not real. The world is absolutely real, but it is just not what it appears to be. So this initiated a great kind of quest, which lasted for 20 years, really, exploring the reality of my experience. And very soon it became clear to me that everything we know of the world, we know through sense perception, through our finite minds, and is subject to the limitations of that finite mind. And I remember when it first dawned on me that everything that I know about the world is only as good as the limitations of my mind through which it is known. Well, that would be a depressing conclusion if it were not for one experience. The one experience that we all have that is not mediated through the finite mind. That is the one experience that could be said to be absolutely true, that is not relative to the finite mind through which it is known, namely the awareness of being. So it became clear to me that through introspection, if one traces one's way back through the layers of thinking and perceiving that constitute our experience, our internal experience, and that are responsible for the way we perceive the world. If one traces one's way back through all those layers, it's like you go through a trapdoor in the mind. You think you're going into your mind, going internally into the body-mind to find the one aspect of your experience that is prior to experience. But something magical happens. It's like when you look at a watercolor painting of William Turner, a landscape painting of William Turner painted at midnight. So there's the full moon and there's a landscape, there are trees and fields and the river and everything, and then full moon up in the top left-hand corner of the painting. And to begin with, you look at the painting, the moon seems to be an object in the painting. But then you go up close to it, you realize it's the only part of the painting that hasn't been painted. It's the white paper. The moon is not in the painting. It's not in the landscape. It's not in the space that the rest of the objects in the landscape seems to exist in. So the moon that seemed to be an object in the landscape is in fact a portal to the reality of the landscape, namely the white paper. Well, it's exactly the same thing, introspection or self-inquiry. It's exactly the same thing. We go deeply into what we think is our own personal mind, looking for its essence, our self, and that's like the full moon. It seems to be in the mind, but you pass out of the mind. You pass out of yourself into infinite being, and that is the aware being or consciousness, and that is the essential, irreducible nature of ourself. And it's the one experience we have that gives us access to the essential, irreducible nature of the universe, because it's the only experience there is that's not mediated through the mind. So this I just started this kind of passionate exploration of my own nature, partly because I wanted to be free of suffering. But it wasn't just that. I wanted to know what was real. I wanted to know what the world really is, beyond its mere appearance to us.
Thank you for sharing that. It's really interesting. Now, there will be people that are listening to this that have never heard of these ideas before. They aren't aware of non-duality. So I think it's important here just to maybe provide a basic introduction into the essence of what this understanding is. So maybe we can start here again with you, Rupert, and then we can move to Bernardo afterwards.
Okay. Well, we could say that this understanding is fundamentally that although reality appears to us as a multiplicity and diversity of discrete and independently existing objects and selves, in reality, it is one infinite, indivisible whole, whose nature is being or consciousness or love. So that might sound like a very philosophical, abstract, hard to relate to theory that doesn't have much to do with our everyday lives. So let me put it in, let me give you an analogy. You two are familiar with this analogy, but it makes this idea very accessible. And I use the analogy of the dream, which I think is actually more than just an analogy. I think it's actually a sample in our experience. It's a hint that reality leaves of itself in our experience that we all experience every 24 hours. So in the example, take someone called Mary. She falls asleep in London. She dreams that she's Jane on the streets of Paris. Of course, the entire dream, the streets of Paris and Jane, are all an appearance of Mary's mind, which is a homogeneous, indivisible whole. But it doesn't appear to that from Jane's point of view. Remember, Mary has localized herself within her own dream as an apparently separate subject of experience, namely Jane, from whose perspective the streets of Paris comprise separate individual people, objects, houses, trees, cars, etc. So from Jane's point of view, her experience takes place in subject-object relationship, in duality. I, the self in here, looking out through the window of my senses at the world out there, which seems to be separate and independent from me. My consciousness, I'm talking on Jane's behalf now, my consciousness is located in, limited to, and derived from my own body. And everything I look out at is outside my consciousness. And of course, this name we give to the stuff that is outside consciousness is matter. So Jane has this belief that mind exists on the inside, matter exists on the outside. And moreover, she realized that she was born into the world, so she presumes that the world gives rise to who she is, her body, and that her body gives rise to the mind, and that the essence of the mind is consciousness. So she has this view that matter produces consciousness. That's how it seems from Jane's point of view. Then, of course, Mary wakes up in London and realizes, oh no, it's not like that at all. The whole thing was the activity of my own mind. And I localize, in order to view the dreamed world, I can't view the dreamed world directly from my bed asleep in London. I have to forget that I'm asleep in London. I have to overlook the nature of my own mind, seem to become a separate subject of experience within my own dream, but that comes at a price. I have to overlook or forget the real nature of my experience in order to do that. So I would suggest that we are all like Jane. We're all numerous Janes. The difference, of course, is that Mary dreams that she's one person, Jane, on the streets of Paris, whereas infinite consciousness, I would suggest, localizes itself as innumerable, apparently separate subjects of experience within its own dream, which is the universe. So when Mary wakes up, she realizes, no, there is no separate individual self. There is no world made out of matter. The entire thing is the activity of my mind. And the world is just how the activity of my own mind appears from Jane's localized and limited point of view. Well, I would suggest the same here. When we look out of our senses at the world, what we really see is the activity of infinite consciousness. It appears as a material world because we view it from the localized perspective as our finite mind. In religious language, the world is how God's thoughts appear to a finite mind.
That's beautiful. I just think it's such a great way to describe what we're talking about here. And I remember being a really young kid and thinking about these things. Like, how do I know this isn't just one big long dream that I'm going to wake up from at the end? I think children wonder about these things. Bernardo, have you anything to add here in addition to what Rupert said?
We can try to stick to the metaphors he chose. I mean, I'm not speaking for non-duality because I'm not a scholar of non-duality, and I'm not what people refer to as an enlightened person. I might come at this from a more left-brain perspective. So for what it's worth, I'll try to speak to this from a left-brain perspective. The core idea of what I normally speak about is first an acknowledgement and that there is a reality outside our individual minds, the mind of Jane, not the mind of Mary. There is a reality outside the mind of Jane. If you grant Jane existence, if you grant Bernardo Kastrup existence, there is a reality beyond Bernardo Kastrup. But that reality is itself experiential or mental or phenomenal, whatever qualifier you choose. It is objective from our point of view, but it is subjective and experiential from its own point of view. And to understand that, just think of my thoughts. From your perspective, my thoughts are objective. My thoughts would still be here even if you were not there now talking to me. My thoughts will not change just because you fantasize them to be different. So my thoughts from your perspective are objective. They have existence independent of you, and they have their own dynamics independent of your wishes, affirmations, fantasies, whatever. But my thoughts from their own perspective are subjective, experiential, mental. So in the same way, the idea is that the world beyond individual minds is experiential, mental, but it is objective from our perspective. Now, how did this split come about? How did Jane arise as a seemingly separate complex in the mind of Mary? Well, that is dissociation, which is a well-known psychiatric phenomenon. There was doubt about whether it was real until the turn of the century, but with the last 20 plus years of neuroimaging, we know for sure that dissociation exists. It can make you blind to what is right in front of your open and well-functioning eyes. That's a study done in Germany in 2015 by Bruno Waldvogel and another co-author. There is something dissociation looks like in a brain scan, in a functional MRI. That's a study done by Jolanda Schlumpf in the Netherlands in 2014 that allows you to objectively diagnose dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called multiple personality disorder. So the multiple personalities have an extrinsic appearance. They look like something in the mind of a person. And what I propose is that life, biology, is what dissociative processes in the mind of nature, in the mind of Mary, look like. Jane is a dissociative process in the mind of Mary. Jane identifies with her own inner life, but not with the mind that's generating the rest of the dream, because Jane, as an avatar in the dream, is dissociated from that mind that is generating the rest of the dream. And the rest of nature has this appearance that we call physical, as opposed to the appearance of what it is in essence, which is mental. Why does it look physical and not mental? Because the screen of perception, as Rupert put it, it is not a transparent windshield that shows us the world as it is in itself. It can't be, because that would require us to mirror the states of the world in our inner cognitive states. If we did that, there would be no upper bound to our inner entropy or the dispersion of our inner states, and we would melt into warm goulash soup. Unbound entropy is not compatible with the preservation of our structure and dynamical structure. And now there is also another argument that can be made about this, even a proof based on game theory, that evolution would never have equipped us with a transparent windshield to see the world as it actually is. We would be driven swiftly to extinction. What perception does, it picks out the salient points about the environment that surrounds us and presents those salient points to us in a way that allows us to react promptly to environmental challenges and opportunities. In other words, what we have is a desktop and a set of icons that allows us to interact optimally with the world. And that's why the world looks physical. That's why it has qualities like color and melody instead of endogenous qualities of experience, like what it feels like to fall in love, what it feels like to be in doubt, what it feels like to have an insight. The world out there is like the latter, but it looks like color and melody and flavor because that's how our internal dashboard of dials presents the world to us. And if you think dissociation is a bad account of what I'm trying to communicate, if you contrast that with Rupert's dream analogy, then science shows us that that's not the case. It is indeed a very good analogy because in about 1/4 of patients with clinically diagnosed dissociative identity disorder, patients with multiple alter personalities, like the old multiple personality disorder label, these different alters, these different disjoint centers of awareness in the mind of the patient, when the patient is dreaming, they partake on the same dream at the same time, concurrently conscious. And they can see each other in the dream, talk to one another, even club each other over the head, which is the nicest example of a study done by Deirdre Barrett at Harvard over 2 decades ago. So clinical psychiatry shows us that in the mind of Mary, Jane 1 and Jane 2 and Jane 3 can not only share a world and be concurrently conscious, they can interact with one another, club each other over the head, just like we do in this world. And if you want to look it up, it's a study called Dreaming Dissociative Identity Disorder by Deirdre Barrett, Harvard, published in Dreams, which is an academic journal, I think 1994.
That's so interesting, and again, a really helpful metaphor. I think just to sort of really emphasize the power of this, whenever we're talking about that lady going blind, whenever one of her alters was present, she was literally blind, and then whenever another part of her personality came online, she could see. So this is how powerful this actually is, which is shocking, And
we know she was
Yes,
literally blind.
I've witnessed this. Sorry.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Well, I've witnessed this firsthand. My nephew had this very same thing when he was maybe 10 or so years. I wasn't aware of this study. I only became aware of it more recently, Bernardo, with our conversations. But this happened to my nephew, and we all knew perfectly well that he was had perfectly good functioning eyes, and yet he would have these episodes when he would go blind and literally behave as if he couldn't see. And his parents and grandparents and family and friends, no disrespect to them at all, because they didn't understand the syndrome. They just thought he was messing around and calling for attention but it's exactly as you described, Bernardo. He literally behaved as if he was blind, and then something would happen, he'd snap out of it, and then everyone would think, oh, there you are, you could see all along, you were just playing around.
These patients have suffered for well over a century because even psychiatry didn't take them seriously. But this study that was done in Germany, published in 2015 in Psych, by Bruno Waldvogel and I forgot the name of the second author. They were clinicians. They were not neuroscientists. they were treating the woman. So there are some, you can nitpick the methodology of their experiment because they didn't implement certain controls, like measuring pupil dilation at the same time that they measured activity in the visual cortex here at the back of the brain with an EEG cap. So there, I was talking to Christoph Koch the other day about this study, and he was able to nitpick some, well, not nitpicking. I mean, these are valid methodological criticisms that you can make, but they were clinicians. This was not a prospective study set up in advance by neuroscientists. What they did was, this woman claimed to have 2 blind alters, so they put an EEG cap on her to measure brain activities, particularly in the visual cortex at the back of your head. And when a blind alter was in control, lo and behold, there was no activity in the visual cortex, even though her eyes were open. And we knew that her eyes work well because the host personality and the other alters are not blind. So that's not something you can fake. You are literally blind. Your visual cortex has much reduced, even non-measurable activity when a blind alter has executive control of the body. So nobody's fooling around here. This is a ego defense mechanism that the mind uses to protect itself against things it does not want to know or does not want to remember. So it does happen in mind space. And the idea is it happens in the broader mind space of all, the mind of Mary, the mind of nature. And we are those dissociative alters. We are blind to each other's minds. We are blind to what's happening in China or in the galaxy of Andromeda. Should it be surprising? Dissociation can make you blind to what is right in front of your open eyes. It's not a surprise. It makes us blind to the truth of reality. In other words, that we are Mary and not Jane.
This is, so what we're essentially saying here is that what is happening in the micro of our minds is also in the macro of the world. Our minds are sort of like a microcosm of what actually happens in the world. And what's, interesting about this as well is that some of the most effective and innovative approaches to psychotherapy at the moment are the ones that address this multiplicity of mind, this idea that there's multiple different parts of ourselves, like internal family systems, transactional analysis, schema therapy. These are the ones that are really sort of moving the needle forward at the moment. So it's just interesting that that's happening. Bernardo, I want to ask you as well, because this has been a more recent, I suppose, change for you. How has this understanding of the world changed your felt experience of being in it on a day-to-day basis? How is your life different before and after, whenever the penny really dropped here?
For me, it changed slowly. When I came at these conclusions, Rupert and I talked about it years ago. I came at these conclusions from an intellectual perspective. In other words, conceptual reasoning here up in the head. And those things don't sink into the rest of your lived experience quickly. They tend to stay in the head as, conceptual conclusions. They don't change your life. They don't recolor your lived experience of being in the world, of being yourself. But years ago, Rupert made this prediction to me. I remember we were in an Italian restaurant drinking wine, and you said, it will sink in. It will happen. It's a question of time. And lo and behold, he was right on. It happens slowly, in a way that you don't really see it happening. One day you wake up and you look back and you realize, darn, it did happen. My experience of the world has changed. This stuff is sinking into the rest of the body, sinking into my emotions as well, not only my conceptual reasoning. And to me, it made me let go of a number of things that our culture considers healthy, but which I think are profoundly unhealthy. Ideas like you have to take the reins of your life. You have to make stuff happen for you, take control of your life. As if an ape could control nature. I mean, this is preposterous. If you believe in this, you're setting yourself up for not only disappointment, but for crushing defeat. It made me let go of a notion that forms the basis of Western well-being approaches, which is that your life is about you. that Jane's life is about Jane. That's absolutely preposterous. We are part of nature. We are something nature is doing. We are not a thing. We are a ripple on the lake. You can't lift the ripple out of the lake and take it home with you. There is only the lake. In exactly the same way, there is only Mary. Jane is a ripple in the mind of Mary. You can't take Jane out of Mary. And what's happening is the dynamics of the mind of Mary, the dynamics of the mind of nature. It's not about, Bernardo Kastrup's life is not about Bernardo Kastrup. It's preposterous. It's like a blossom in my apple tree, thinking that its life is about itself and doing its best not to die. Well, if it would get its way, there would be no apples and apple trees. The whole thing would grind to a halt. And you may think that that is psychologically unhealthy to think that your life is not about you. But my personal experience of living this conclusion is that it is liberating. It's a profound liberation. You no longer have to wrestle with a level of responsibility that is unnatural for a human being, a level of control of the dynamics of nature that human beings simply cannot have. And your life become one, and this word will sound romantic, but I don't mean it romantically. I mean it literally. Your life becomes one of service to nature. Bernardo Kastrup is a means to an end, just like Jane is a means to an end. Some insight Mary needs to have by dreaming her mind and confronting her own mind through Jane. And if you realize this, you let go of so much oppressive stuff. It's the freedom of the slave. It's the freedom of service. Bernardo never takes responsibility for the final outcome of the dynamics of the world, because it's preposterous for an ape to take responsibility for the outcomes of nature's dynamics. And that gives me a lot of peace. And the responsibility of doing my part. So long as I do my part, the rest is not my problem. And I just ride the wave with the rest of us.
That's powerful. So would a metaphor that might encapsulate this be like, just in the same way that there's, I don't know, 50 trillion cells in our body, and each one of them is kind of doing its part for the larger whole? Is that a similar way you look at your life, and you're doing your part for the larger body of which we all are a part?
Yeah, and we all have direct cognitive access to what the larger body is doing. It's called instinct. But the trade-off that nature made with us is that it gave us metacognition, the ability to self-reflect, to identify ourselves as a individual agent in the dynamics of nature. The rest of nature doesn't have that. The rest of nature is wired straight into the web of instinct. So they do their parts automatically. But we have this capacity to step out of the web of instinct because of our ability to self-reflect, to cognize the contents of our own minds and to recognize ourselves as individual subjects. This obfuscates that subtle input from the web of instinct that is always telling you where your life is supposed to flow, in which direction, in a way that doesn't give a damn about your personal agenda, doesn't give a damn whether you get that amount of money you want, whether you get that status you want, whether you will be rich and famous. It doesn't care at all about that. But we obfuscate this natural flow of nature that is always expressing itself through us and which we have direct access to. We obfuscate that with our inner metacognitive storytelling. The narrative of our lives was, is, and should be, emphasis on what it should be, that makes us blind to the flow of nature as it wants to express itself through us. And that's nature's gamble. It created a species that can unplug. I mean, the positive thing is that through metacognition, nature finally, through our eyes, can take explicit account of itself. Look around and say, oh, this is me. This is what I'm doing. Only through metacognitive eyes can nature step out of itself and contemplate itself as if from the outside. It's not really from the outside, but as if from the outside. The price that nature is paying for it is that here we have a species unplugged from the web of instinct that can put an end to nature as we know today on this planet. It's a big gamble, and it's unclear yet whether it will pay off or be a disaster.
Just a quick break here to tell you about an exciting new membership we're developing, and then we'll get right back to the show. This gets you access to our mastered library of over 5 years of psychology conferences, including over 230 talks and interviews with the world's leading psychologists, professors, and authors, unlimited CPD certification, transcripts, quizzes, premium passes for our annual conference, online courses with Richard Schwartz and Deb Dana, and more. The cost is £97 for 1 year, which breaks down at around 27p per day. The best bit is you can try it out for 30 days completely risk-free, as all orders come with a 100% money-back guarantee. If you're interested, please go to twmembers.com for more information. Okay. Let's move back to Rupert now. Rupert, this summit focuses on addiction, all right, and we're trying to understand addiction in the broadest possible context. And I'm not sure if you remember this, but you've spoke with us before, and in that interview, a question was asked to you about addiction, and you have a really interesting perspective on the link between materialism and addiction. So I don't know if you remember this or not, but I maybe would like to ask you that question now. What do you see a link between materialism and addiction, and if so, what might that be?
Yes, I do think there's a very direct link between our prevailing materialist culture and the prevalence of addiction, the prevalence of suffering, despair, and the addiction that often comes from it in our culture. Yes. Let's keep using the analogy of Mary and Jane. So Jane has a materialistic outlook, namely she believes that the world outside her is made out of dead inert matter, and it gives rise to her mind, her individual self, and so on. So Jane believes and feels that she is a fragment and incomplete. And this sense of incompleteness, it really accompanies her all the time, without her knowing it. Almost everything she does is motivated by the desire to bring this sense of incompleteness, sense of lack, to an end. She thinks that she's seeking intimacy in a relationship because she wants a relationship, or that she's engaging in certain activities because she enjoys the activities, or eating or ingesting certain substances because she no, that's not why she's doing any of those things. So the reason why she's doing all of those things is because they all have the capacity in one or another to bring the feelings and the thoughts that attend those feelings, the feelings and the beliefs that she is a temporary, finite, separate self, to an end. The feelings and the ideas, when she gets the object, the person, the substance, the activity that she desires, in that moment she has what she wants, and therefore the sense of lack or incompleteness comes to an end. What do we call that experience? Happiness. So Jane very quickly makes a connection between the acquisition of objects, substances, activities, relationships, so on, and the experience of happiness. In fact, she believes that they produce happiness. So her whole life is spent in pursuit of these objects, substances, activities, and so on. And sure enough, every time she gets one, temporarily, the feeling of lack comes to an end. Why? Because she has what she wants, and sure enough, it always correlates with the experience of happiness. Her mind interprets the object acquired, or the substance, the activity, as the cause of that happiness. But no, she misses the essential understanding is that the acquisition of the object, substance, activity, relationship, and so on, just brings the thoughts and feelings of lack or insufficiently to an end. And as a result, her true nature, which lies behind the mind, behind the activities of thinking and feeling, shine. Just as when the clouds part, the blue sky shines. It was there all along, but it was obscured by the clouds. Well, this I would suggest that peace or quiet joy are the nature of being, the nature of our essential being, but they are obscured by the dark clouds of thinking and feeling. And when we acquire the object, substance, activity, and so on, these thoughts and feelings briefly subside, and the background of happiness shines. So now, just one thing to say about that, because strictly speaking, one shouldn't say that the nature of consciousness or being or reality is peace or happiness. This is to anthropomorphize reality. And I accept that limitation. Why do I do it? Because this, I refer to it as the shining of the background, the cessation, the temporary cessation of thoughts and feelings, and the revelation of the essence of the mind, our true nature, is revealed then, or laid bare then. It's strictly speaking without qualities, but from a human experience, that recognition, that brief recognition, that brief revelation of our true nature is experienced as peace and happiness. And peace and happiness are not really emotions like anxiety and fear and jealousy and shame and guilt are emotions, in just the same way that the little patch of blue sky that appears is not a blue cloud that appears amongst all the other grey clouds. It looks like a cloud. It's sometimes shaped like a cloud. It has the same size as little clouds, but it's not a cloud. Likewise, the experience of peace and happiness is not an emotion. I'm only referring to it as peace and happiness because that's how we reference it. That's how we describe it as human beings. But actually, in that moment of this revelation of the background, we actually see Jane ceases to be Jane. At that moment, Mary's mind is shining in Jane's mind at that moment because Jane's mind of thinking and feeling has temporarily ceased. And Jane thinks peace and happiness are experiences that I have as a separate person. No. In the experiences of peace and happiness, Jane, the separate self, ceases to be that. Of course, she doesn't conceptualize it like that to herself. Later, her mind will rise up and say, I, Jane, experienced happiness because I met so-and-so or undertook this activity. That's the mind's erroneous interpretation of experience during which it was not present. So yes, I think there's a deep connection with the prevailing materialist culture and the prevalence of depression and addiction in our society. And I think the reason why we still haven't really found a remedy for it is that any remedy in our objective experience, any remedy that Jane finds on the streets of Paris, they're only at best temporary remedies. The ultimate remedy must be to recognize who we really are at the deepest level, and that is we are not temporary, finite, separate selves.
For sure, that's beautifully said, and it's a unique perspective that I haven't heard anybody else talking about. So the basic mistake is thinking that the object of our addiction brought us happiness, when in reality it was this cessation of the seeking self and this sense of lack, that temporarily suspension of that was the real happiness. But we then attribute that happiness to the addictive substance behavior, and that caused us to chase it.
It was the suspension of that brought the activities of thinking and feeling temporarily to an end. The acquisition of an object brings the activities of thinking and feeling, the feelings of lack, to an end. And as the activities of thinking and feeling cease, then the background, our true nature, unlimited consciousness or infinite being shines. And that experience is interpreted at the level of human being as the emotions we describe as peace and happiness.
And this process of, your direct approach and this process of waking up helps you to sort of make that a bigger and bigger part of your life so that you don't seek it in substances and behaviors and other things.
Yes, exactly. Once this becomes clear to us that peace or fulfillment can never be found through objective experience, and that it is only in the background and in the essence of our minds that it is to be found, then we go directly there. We cease seeking fulfillment through any kind of objective experience. This does not imply that we cease seeking objective experience. No, we continue to seek objective experience, although our search is modified. I'll say something about that in a minute. But we don't cease seeking objective experience. We just cease seeking objective experience in order to find fulfillment. We find fulfillment in the only place where it can be found, that is, in the essence of our own mind, in our own being. We may then still, and we do still have desires, we do still seek, but no longer for the purpose of finding fulfillment. On the contrary, our desires, and this connects with what you were saying earlier, Bernardo, our desires come from a sense of fulfillment or peace, however you name it. And the purpose of our lives then our lives are then in service of that understanding. So we still have desires, but the desires don't arise on behalf of a personal, separate, individual self. But the mechanism of desire is still present, and it's cleansed, it's purified of the perverting influence of the belief of separation. And such a desire is very powerful. Why? Because your desire arises on behalf of the whole, not on behalf of in the individual. And what one finds then is that the whole then conspires to help you.
That's beautiful. And it's funny, I think it's an important point that you raised about, it's not that you don't stop doing things in the world. It's not like you withdraw. And, you and Bernardo were probably two of the most productive and motivated people. The amount you guys do is incredible. So it's your evidence that this isn't going to make you retreat into a cave and withdraw from the world, So I want to move back over to Bernardo here again. And you've got an interesting hypothesis about, I wouldn't say it's specifically about addiction, but just about, I suppose, well, it's in a similar kind of area, but something I heard you say in another area or another interview was, if you sever your contact with the fountainhead of meaning, you have to find a replacement. This is sort of like cutting off your connection with nature, maybe getting too rational about your life, et cetera, et cetera. Could you maybe speak to that comment? Oh, you're on mute, Bernardo. Sorry.
In psychology, this is called fluid compensation. When you lose a source of meaning, you have to fluidly compensate for that in some other way, even if it is profoundly artificial and dysfunctional. We are meaning-seeking creatures, stronger than Nietzsche's will to power or Freud's will to pleasure. There is the will to meaning, and that's the top, that's the profoundest will. And we all are born connected with that, and we are sort of, I think, connected with that fountainhead of meaning at all times, but we don't see it because we replace it with a conceptual narrative that we inherit from culture, from parents, doctors, 8 o'clock news anchors that tell us what it is to live a good life. And usually that recipe inculcates in our mind the idea of a life that is profoundly unnatural, supremely unnatural. And then we no longer see the ebb and flow of a meaningful life that is there at all times, because it doesn't care at all about what the culture is saying is supposed to be a well-lived life at this particular point in history, in this particular point in the geography of the planet, in Western society, namely. And because we no longer see that, we need to fluidly compensate for that and find a replacement using the only tool the culture tells us, which is to create another conceptual narrative, to have a objective, to have a goal, or to find a replacement. And that's, I think, at the core of patterns of addiction. And it's important to understand that when we talk about, at least when and I'm sure Rupert as well, when I talk about addiction, I don't mean just substance addiction, like cigarettes or alcohol or heavier drugs. Our society is completely soaked in patterns of addiction. Shopping for things that you don't need, that's a pattern of addiction. When you have a perfectly functional bathroom, but you want a new one, that's a pattern of addiction. That's the fluid compensation. You're trying to replace that which you lack with something else that you don't really lack, but you tell yourself that you do because it gives you a sense of control, a sense that you're taking steps toward alleviating that vacuum in the middle of your chest, that primordial knot, that black hole in the middle of your chest, because you're disconnected from the ebb and flow of meaning in nature. Eating meat, thinking that you have the right, the God-given right to eat meat, that's a pattern of addiction. Buying new shoes is a pattern of addiction. Watching reality TV is a pattern of addiction. I mean, just about everything in Western society that you can see on commercial television, which I'm glad to say I haven't watched in over a decade now, but I know enough to know that it's still going on. Just about everything is this desperate attempt to fluidly compensate for the fact that we are no longer connected to the fountainhead of meaning in nature, which is our birthright. And we're trying to compensate for that in a way that is as artificial as the process that obscured that natural fountainhead of meaning in the first place. And that you see that in the whole of the Western recipe for a good life.
Wow. Okay. Now,
can I just add one
please
thing to that, talking about addictions, how prevalent they are, that the subtlest and most ubiquitous thinking. Think how much of our thinking, if we were to print out every thought that we had today and ask ourselves which one of those thoughts were either necessary as a practical response to our circumstance, or was a thought that was a conscious thought, so to speak, that investigating the nature of reality, or how many of the thoughts we had, what percentage of the thoughts we had were completely useless? 95% would be generous. So what is the purpose of those thoughts, those 95% of our thoughts? They are, exactly as you say, Bernardo, to distract us from the unbearable black hole in our chest. And it may not be, we may not be in a position to go and find a certain substance, watch TV, or any of the other more obvious addictions, but thinking, it's free, it's easy, it's cheap, it's legal, it's not bad for your health, or at least not overtly so. So it's just really it's the most prevalent addiction, unnecessary thinking. And its purpose is solely to avoid the unbearable nature of this emptiness in our chest.
I was in a flight the other day, 1.5 hour flight, actually only a few days ago. And I didn't bring anything to read or do during the flight. And I turned off my phone. So I just sat there in my chair doing absolutely nothing. And at some point I needed to go to the toilet. And when I came back from the toilet, I could see everybody on the airplane. It was a small airplane. I was the only person that didn't have a phone, a book, a magazine, something in their hands to distract oneself. And I thought, suddenly I had this realization that we can't just sit and do nothing for 1.5 hours anymore. We even can't drive anymore without playing a podcast or music. We need to be constantly distracted. Otherwise, we have to face up to the reality of how disconnected from nature we are. And that's overwhelming, I think, for people. Of course, once you reconnect, then you realize that the will of nature as it manifests through you is inconceivably overwhelming, like you said. So it's not like it's a sea of roses when you reconnect. You're reconnecting to a very powerful charging station that can overwhelm you as well. But at least it's natural. It's how it's supposed to be, and not a distraction, not an artificial narrative.
Was it
Sure.
was it Blaise Pascal who said all of humanity's problems would be solved if a person could learn to sit in silence in an empty room for 5 minutes with no thoughts in their mind? I think there's a lot of truth in it.
For sure. Yeah, that idea, Rupert, of printing, if you could print out all of your thoughts in a day on a piece of paper and look at them, I don't think I'd like to read mine. It wouldn't be very interesting. And but something I'm curious to ask you both is, for someone that, what we're kind of talking about here is maybe letting nature work through us more and being in a position to do that. And for the two of you guys, you are excellent at doing that. And maybe that's a contradictory phrase to say that, but how do you know whenever you get an idea for something, whether that is the whole, whether that is nature wanting to express something through you, or whether that is ego? How do you discern that in your own lives? So Bernardo, if you want to go first here, and then maybe Rupert, if you want to follow up.
It took me decades. It's nearly impossible, I think, for somebody who has not been paying attention for years, trying to figure out this distinction. It's nearly impossible for a person to differentiate the little voice in your head that is actually weaving a narrative of personal agency from the impersonal stuff that is trying to express itself through you. And with me, it was a matter of just paying attention, trial and error, making a million mistakes, but paying attention every time. Today, I may be deluding myself, but today I think I'm fairly tuned to that. So I will share with you just some principles. There is no magical recipe here, only attention and becoming more mature. So there are no 7 steps to figuring out what nature wants to do versus what you deceive yourself that you want to do. But there are some hallmarks of the wheel of nature. One of them is it doesn't give a damn about you. It doesn't give a damn whether you have food in your plate tomorrow, a roof over your head, whether you satisfy your ego need for status and visibility. It just doesn't care. And that's where a healthy ego comes to play, because you need to maintain the tool. If you don't have what to eat tomorrow, you're no good to nature. You can't do what nature is trying to do through you.
Like the starving artist sort of metaphor.
Yeah. So the ego has to play a balancing role to make sure that, one, you don't go off on a dangerous tangent, because when the ego feels the will of nature, but it thinks that it is its will, you become very dangerous. You can become a Trump, you can become a Hitler, a Putin, because now you think that unfathomable will, that gigantic force that is trying to erupt through you, you think that that's you. And now you're a danger to humanity. So you need a healthy ego to not make not fall into that trap, and to make sure that you maintain this body and mind so you can serve nature. Because if you die starved, you're no good to anyone, certainly not to nature. But that's one of the hallmarks. There are other hallmarks. I had a list the other day, but I didn't know you were going to ask this question, so I didn't prepare, but let me think of another one. It changes. I think one mistake that a lot of people, well, the few people who are trying to pay attention, one of the mistakes they make is that they think that the will of nature is sort of set in stone the day you were born. And that if you see that your will is fluctuating, then that's your own nonsense. It's not the will of nature. That's not how it works in my experience. Nature course corrects, especially when something is achieved that satisfies it. It turns its attention to something else, and you go off on another direction. So looking for that absolutely stable thing will just blind you to what's going on. It changes, and it changes. Oh, and there is another thing, a very important characteristic. The will of nature tells you the direction, but it never tells you why. It never gives you a nicely knit story that allows you to understand what you're about to do, why it's important, how it connects with everything else. It doesn't have this beautiful, nice little narrative that all fits together and makes you feel warm and fuzzy inside. No, you have no idea why something in you is moving you in that direction. That's another hallmark of it. When you are deceiving yourself, when an ego narrative is trying to pretend that it's the will of nature, it always has a nice story, a nice explanation, a nice justification. Oh, I'm doing this because this, and that, and how it all comes together. Oh, I feel so warm and fuzzy. I'm on the right track here. If that's what's going on, at least I'm sharing my personal experience, not absolute truths here. I may be full of it. But in my experience, the real deal, the real merchandise, not the copy, it never gives you an explanation. It never tells you why. It tells you the direction. It tells you the what. It may even hint at the how, but it never tells you the why. I have the feeling that it is, cognitively speaking, fundamentally incomprehensible for an ape mind to understand the whys of the will of nature. So I think it's fundamental. It will never tell you a why. And if there is a why, either you are quoting that with your own narratives to sort of make sense of it for yourself, or you are deceiving yourself that your ego agenda is the agenda of nature.
Wow. Okay. Rupert, anything to add on top of that?
That was beautiful, Bernardo. Perhaps just one simple guideline that I use for myself. If reality is indeed one infinite and indivisible whole, then there are no real, separate, independently existing people, animals, things. So I try to use that principle, that understanding, as a guideline for the way I think, feel, act, and relate. Are my thoughts and feelings on the inside, my actions and relationships on the outside, in line with, informed by, and an expression of this understanding? And I do my best. I'm not perfect, but I do my best to live by that single principle.
If I can add one thing, I just thought of it as Rupert was saying what he just said. The image came to my mind again. It's one of the characteristics of the will of nature as I experience it. I'm not giving it as a recipe for everyone, but for me, if I am doing nature's bidding, I have peace. Except for my own narratives, my own nonsense that may make me stressed. But one level lower than that, at the foundational level, I have a sense of peace. Like, okay, what I'm doing, it's going the right direction. When I'm not doing nature's bidding, Rupert and I had this discussion already. He knows what is coming, but I'll try to put it across in a more gentle way, so I don't look like I'm exaggerating. But it keeps on poking you. It's very difficult to find peace and rest when you're not doing what nature's trying to do through you. Well, I'll stop trying not to exaggerate. It makes your life hell, absolute hell. Nothing is satisfying. And I can easily see that if you are not aware of the reason you're feeling like that, if you're not aware that, oh, time for a course correction here, time to listen to that little voice deep inside you, it's a subtle voice, but it's overwhelming as well. If you don't, that's what I have to do. I have to listen to that and course correct. If you don't know that that's the correct course of action to course correct, I can easily see that you will be addicted to something, because you run away from that in some way. You will become disconnected with the stream of meaning that usually is supposed to go through you and to nurture you and to give you peace. If you don't have that, and you don't course correct, and you insist on going down, your own egoic narrative about what is supposed to happen, you will fall into addiction. I can very easily see that. I can easily see myself falling into addiction. So I count myself very lucky that I had my share of suffering at some point in that process. I think I figured this out, and I count myself extremely lucky, because if you don't figure this out, whoa, life can be very tough. Can be very tough. Now, I'm not saying that it's not tough if you follow the will of nature, because you'll be dealing with an energy of a magnitude that is nearly inconceivable for a human being. It's enormous. And you're touching that energy. It's like you're flirting with 12,000 volts, if you know what I mean. And you can't break away from it, otherwise you're not nurtured, you're not fed, you're going to shrink and die. But you also cannot touch it full on, it will fry you. Not because it's evil, but because of what it is. It can only be what it is. And negotiating this trade-off is probably the skill of a well-lived life. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how to do that.
Awesome. Okay, so just one question now it sort of builds on what you were saying there. You're probably two of the wisest people I know, so I want to ask this. What is your definition of a well-lived life on this planet? So Rupert, I'll start with you, and then we can finish up with Bernardo.
It would be a life that was informed by the nature of reality. The implications of such a life would be peace on the inside, loving relationships, on indiscriminately loving relationships on the outside. In other words, we love everybody equally. It doesn't mean to say we like everybody. We can't like everybody, but we love everyone. We feel that at the deepest level we share our being with them. And an activity engaging in life in a way that brings this understanding into society in one way or another. That doesn't mean necessarily talking about it or writing about it, but a life that is where not only one's own internal experience is consistent with this understanding, not only one's relationships, but one's actions in the world are informed by and an expression of the shared nature of our being.
That's beautiful. Now, Bernardo, what about yourself?
I think a well-lived life is a life that follows the agenda of nature and not our own made-up conceptual egoic agenda or narrative, our ideas about what is supposed to be a good life, to be rich and famous or whatever. And I think the hallmark of a life well lived is when you do not have the sense that you're wasting your time. Most people have that sense, like they see the clock ticking, they're getting older, and something inside them is telling them, I'm wasting time, I'm getting older, this is coming to an end, and I still didn't do what? And people can't articulate to themselves, what is it that you didn't do? And it's creating that oppressive feeling that you're wasting your time, that you're not really doing the real thing. And so many people turn 70 with that feeling of my life was not lived, even if they are successful, they achieved richness and fame. There is still that feeling that no, this was not it. When you don't have that oppressive feeling that you're wasting your time, that's the hallmark that now you're going the right direction. And then what you do feel is that getting older doesn't feel oppressive anymore. It's like the life manifest aligns in timing with the latent life. And they go hand in hand. It's as if everything is properly timed. And when you get there at 82 years old, the average life of a male in the Netherlands, if everything has gone in a natural way, then you have that feeling, it is accomplished. The timings were all correct. There isn't that feeling, let me reset the process and try it over again because I have this feeling that I wasted it. No, I don't know how to tell people what it is that they need to do, because it's different for every single person, right? No two apples are created identical by nature. And I don't know how I got there myself, to be honest with you. I'm not sure I can help anyone because I don't know how I got there. But I do have this feeling now, which I didn't have 10 years ago, that my life is unfolding hand in hand with my latent life. One is the manifestation of the other. They are not out of phase. They are not delayed. They didn't become disconnected. And I sense that, let me cross my fingers that when I go beyond 80, all these timings, everything will have happened at the right time. And everything that was supposed to happen, everything that was latent, did happen. And then everything comes to an end in a natural way without that oppressive feeling, I haven't done it, I haven't lived it, or whatever, that feeling of a life unfulfilled.
Brilliant. Well, that's a great note to end on. Thank you very much, Bernardo. Thank you very much, Rupert. I know you have to get going. So before you go, where can people find you online and learn more about your work?
rupertspira.com or my YouTube channel. Those are the two places to go.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Rupert. It's been great to connect with you, and I want to wish you all the best going forward.
Thank you both. Really, as always, lovely to be with you both, to speak with you. Sorry that I have to go a little promptly. It was my fault for starting late. I've got another meeting, but thank you both. Really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
It's been great to see you again, Rupert.
Really nice to see you again, Bernardo. Yeah.